Hello and welcome to Ratio Christi Television. What motivated Mao to commit genocide? That's what we're talking about in this episode with my next guest, talking about dictators and genocide. Ratio Christi is a campus apologetics alliance. We set up Christian apologetics clubs on university, college, community college, and high school campuses throughout the United States and internationally as well. Through apologetics, we're able to address the tough questions that people have about Christianity, different man-made religions out there, and also relevant world issues. The purpose of our organization is to help make people aware of the evidence for the Christian worldview and point people to truth with a capital T, which is why we call our program Truth Matters. Joining me is Stephanie Potts. Stephanie is a missionary with Haven Ministries out of Denver, Colorado. She worked with the federal government for 15 years and joined Haven Ministries in 2015. She received her bachelor's degree from Florida State University in political science and international relations and received her master's degree in geographic information systems from Penn State University. She specializes in evangelizing to Muslims and Native Americans, so we definitely need to have her on for those topics sometime in the future. But today, again, we're talking about dictators and genocide. Yes, many people today, younger generations are not weren't alive when certain genocides took place, but many people still have. The most important thing we could do is to educate people about different dictators in the last couple hundred years, how many people died under their genocides. We obviously want to study history and not have it repeat itself. So it's very important that we're doing this show today. Stephanie's been here before, so I want to welcome her back to Truth Matters. Welcome back, Stephanie.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Very vital topic. A lot of people today, especially youth, college level on down, haven't studied the lives of any dictators. They haven't studied any genocides. Very important information for people to know about, especially from the Christian worldview and how we should respond to all this. Is the ideology of communism alone to blame for Mao's genocide?
Well, I would have to respond to that with yes and no. An ideology alone can't be the explanation for why genocide happens. It's how that ideology is implemented. And in the case of communism, so much power is put into the hands of a very small number of people that it makes it ripe for genocide and for corruption. And you can even have this issue in a democracy where you have the dictatorship of the majority. You don't have equal representation like you do in a republic, which is the reason why our founders created a republic in the first place. And the fact of the matter is that communism killed 94 million people, 65 million of which were in China under Mao's reign alone. His ideology of communism empowered him to force industrialization on his people. What used to be family farms were converted into communes, and even the peasants on these communes, were then encouraged to kill their former landowners, again to create a sense of terror and control for Mao. And it was through this Great Leap Forward program that Mao put in place that created this horrendous situation. And unfortunately, it failed. It didn't create a good enough harvest, and people starved as a result of it. And anyone who didn't think the way that he did and didn't agree, with his policies were purged and killed. And he deported anybody who didn't think the way he liked. And he even forced labor on the sick and the infirm. It's really sad.
Stephanie, I'm really glad that you're here today because a lot of people have heard of Hitler. Usually, most people hear about Hitler. Second after that is probably Stalin, who people hear about, but not as many people know about Mao. So I'm very thankful for you to be here today to talk about him and the genocide that took place underneath him. Very important topic for people to learn about, and very important too in what you said earlier about communism in contrast to a constitutional republic. And that's what people need to realize what the U.S. was founded upon. We hear the word democracy used all the time, but that usually isn't really defined. And people, I think, many times confuse that with the constitutional republic that the U.S. was actually founded upon. And I encourage people to look up the definitions of all these terms that we're using today, which will be very beneficial in addition to what you're already letting them know. Now, of the enemies of communism, who was Mao's greatest enemy and why?
Well, Mao followed Karl Marx's theory that the capitalist imperialists were the greatest enemy, but within his regime specifically, he really hated clergy, he hated the bourgeois, which was the landowners at the time. But I think more than anybody, he hated the intellectuals, the people who could think for themselves. He didn't want anybody teaching the children of China who they themselves could think for themselves, because he didn't want the children to be able to grow up thinking outside of his own philosophy and his own mentality. And unfortunately, Marx really was the one who pushed for state-run education programs. And again, for this whole sense of having the state control the mind of the child. And here in America, unfortunately, we're seeing a little bit of this going on with programs like Common Core. And again, with the state trying to control the way that we think. And it's just a dangerous precedent that we really need to be looking out for. Rudolph Joseph Rimmel of the University of Hawaii once said that Marxism was the greatest, most violent religion of all time, even worse than the Crusades and the Catholic Protestant Wars and the Catholic Inquisition. And it's Marx's war on poverty and on the exploitation of the poor and imperialism. What led to this incredibly violent religion of Marxism. And I just always think back to what Ronald Reagan said when he said, freedom not rooted in faith, and I would have to add education not rooted in faith, can lead to moral anarchy, which in turn creates social and cultural chaos. And that's what Marxism feeds off of. And that's what Mao wanted. He wanted chaos. And we're kind of seeing a little bit of this going on today here in America with this rise in cultural Marxism and rise in social and economic Marxism. In China during the Cultural Revolution, children as young as 14 joined Mao's Red Guard and marauded around China, killing their professors. Again, it was they had to attack the education system from its root in order to change the mindset of the future of China. And they either killed their professors or they threw them in a gulag, or even had them dragged out into the public square, forced to be on and basically they had to bark like a dog in the public. They were just humiliated and made to be look like fools, which is a little bit of what we're seeing today for Christians, especially people who promote creationism. And unfortunately, I get a little scared about kids like David Hogg, who understandably is upset and angry about the gun debate. What happened down there in Parkland, Florida is awful. But his anger and his visceral behavior is very concerning. But I don't really blame him for that. I blame that on the media, and I blame that on the left-leaning narrative that goes on in our schools today. Yeah.
Definitely. And this is something that people need to be aware of. We need to encourage people, Christians, of course, especially, to study history. And if people don't study history, then they aren't very intellectual in that they're not going to know about the past and what happened to help keep this from happening again. And it's interesting that when we look at the different genocides that have taken place just in the last couple hundred years, when people were being arrested, were being rounded up and put in jail or prison or taken off to a camp, the intellectuals, quote unquote, was one of the groups that were always rounded up. Because like you had said, if you're a dictator, you don't want people who are critical thinkers. You don't want people who can think for themselves. You want your worldview, your ideology, your philosophy to be what is spread, what is taught, and what is supported by everyone. It's very interesting when you're talking about China and Mao. There's actually a news story that just came out 3 days ago. It's called China's High-Tech Plan to Control Its Citizens Completely. And they're talking about this new point system, a social credit system that gives people points for good behavior and bad behavior. And that would actually control different things that they get as citizens in China. Very interesting. That is on patheos.com, patheos.com. China's high-tech plan to control its citizens completely. Now, of course, this is a brand new news story talking about Mao and where this genocide took place. You had mentioned how there were youth who were killing their professors. What about today? Do we have Maoist youth organizations here in America?
Yeah, I was just doing a little bit of research, and from what I could find, there are quite a few organizations at universities as well as mass Maoist groups throughout the country. We have groups like the Progressive Youth Organization at the University of Missouri in Kansas City, and the Revolutionary Student Front at the University of Texas in Austin, and the Revolutionary Front at Texas State in San Marcos, and the Revolutionary Student Union at the University of Houston in Victoria, Texas. But we can't forget that the Black Panthers were Maoists, and Che Guevara from Cuba, and who led the socialist movement down there, was a Maoist. And so those are obviously very, very powerful groups. And Che Guevara, you can get on Amazon and there's 5,000 different types of Che Guevara t-shirts out there, and you see these kids, I don't even think they realize who he was and that he was a mass murderer. They all wear these things thinking it's cool, but it's not. Then you have groups like Serve the People. They're located in big cities like Los Angeles, New York City, Kansas City, Charlotte, and Austin. And another group called From the People to the People, and they're also located in Texas, in San Marcos. And then finally, there's a proletariat feminist group called the Stonewall Militant Front, and they're located in Austin. Again, this is all I have been able to find thus far after a little bit of research. But I find it interesting that so many of these Maoist groups who are in favor of violent overflow, or the violent overthrow of the government, are located in Texas, which is really a bastion of conservative thought here in America. So very concerning.
Definitely, and people are many times distracted by jihadists and different violent groups that show up on the nightly news. But guess what? There's a whole lot of groups working just as hard, if not harder. And because they have a different method of operation, they don't show up on the nightly news. They're working behind the scenes to destroy this country from within, from whatever angle they're coming from. You have the Muslim Brotherhood when it comes to Islam. You have these Maoist groups. I mean, whether it's a religious ideology or political ideology or a combination of both, like when it comes to Islam, Islam being a religio-political system, a religion and a political ideology combined, many times makes people not even worry about that, not knowing that. It's just a religion. No, it's not. But of course, we have other groups that are just political, not religious, so they don't seem like any type of a threat to some people, but they do to others. So very important that people get educated about this. But when it comes to communism, what led up to communism taking over mainland China, and how concerned should we be about these Maoist groups who are here in America?
Well, in the 1800s, Great Britain and the Qing dynasty of China had two opium wars. And these were based upon the fact that China had created a trade deficit for Great Britain. Sound familiar? And they had some very unfair trade policies in place. And a lot of these trade policies were based upon a Confucian mentality of high government regulation on any incoming trade. So they were not proponents of free trade at all. And this created a lot of problems for not just Great Britain, but for Europe as a whole, because they had a very serious issue of shortages in silver because they were constantly having to pay Chinese merchants. So as a result of this, Britain decided to purchase tons of opium from India and encourage the Chinese to purchase their opium and start using it. And by doing this, they flooded the markets and caused the Chinese economy to reverse and be the one on an economic downturn. Also, unfortunately, what happened is so many Chinese people were addicted to the opium that was coming in that it created an epidemic. So I think a lot of people who are probably listening to this are thinking, gosh, that sounds awfully familiar. And it's because it's a very similar situation to what we're seeing today. President Trump is fighting the unfair trade policies that China has created. We have a major trade deficit issue with them. And most of the opium that we're dealing with in this country, with our own opioid addiction epidemic here, most of that opium comes from China. And what's interesting is that most of the children who grow up in China are grown up in an education system that teaches them that we must avenge the opium wars, that it was the imperialist nature of Great Britain and Europe and the West that created this problem, and it was a huge humiliation for them. So I believe that China is really focusing they're still living in the 19th century, but to avenge these opium wars. So again, they naturally hate imperialism for that reason. And the imperialism that, the Qing dynasty had, which caused this problem for them in the first place. So, after the Qing dynasty fell, China fell into a civil war themselves. And it was between the communists and the nationalists, which is interesting because we have a lot of those same issues here in America, where you have these far left wings and far right wings fighting for control. And ultimately, it was the communists who won out. Yeah.
And what role did Confucianism play in Mao's perspective on imperialism?
Well, Confucianism really focuses on that father figure, Father China, and it also focuses on solidarity and harmony of people, especially people who have the same values, the same Marxist values as Maoist China did. They also looked at a brother as not just a familial bond, but somebody who was taught by the same teacher. In this case, it would be Marx. Anybody who follows Marxist ideology would be a brother. So they supported the Marxists all across the country and all across the world. And so to understand Mao, you have to really understand not just Marxism, but his the ancient Confucian beliefs of brotherhood and protecting people who are part of your family, but also part of your educational family. Again, getting back to why the educational system is so vital in communist thought and being able to control the way people think. So in regards to Marxism, again, the imperialist capitalist is the greatest threat. And Mao even moved, he tried to move away from the Soviet Union during the 50s and 60s because in his mind, they were becoming too imperialist. And imperialism is not a brotherly way of thinking. Imperialism is focused primarily on trying to control the world and take over the world. And that's nothing better than the capitalist West in his mind. So to Mao, the class nature of the state determines the external policies of that state. And if you're a real socialist country, it's not just a matter of socialist tendencies and what you're saying, but it has to be a foreign policy of socialism too. And if you're not, if you're like the Soviet Union and you want to gain power, which is something that Khrushchev wanted. He wanted to have more control across the world. Mao hated this, and he would purge the people. And there was great genocide against anybody who wasn't a Stalinist in his mind, which meant total control, high totalitarian government. So Mao was kind of moving away from the Soviet Union revisionism and of that of Khrushchev at the time. So there was a lot of killings that he did at that time as well. So anybody who he considered to be an imperialist was a problem.
Now, why did Mao intervene in the Korean War, and how does Maoist thought influence North Korean leadership today?
Well, it's interesting because the CIA at that time didn't really anticipate Mao to get himself involved in the war. He had just been established for about a year, the People's Republic of China, because they were established in 1949. So they didn't really estimate his resolve and his interest in his fellow Marxists the way that they should have. They didn't understand his philosophy, which is based on, again, Marxism and that Confucian thought of brotherhood. And so I personally believe that is really the main reason why he invaded, is because of that Confucian brotherhood, protect the Marxists. And he was also a big supporter of guerrilla liberation struggles across the world. This is why Che Guevara really liked Mao. And he didn't like Russia because they were, taking land from Eastern Europe. That's not the way that Mao operated. He believed that the peasants should be the bulwark of a revolution, not the elite, which is, in his view, the way the Soviet Union was going. And again, to underscore that Confucian belief of protecting his Marxist brothers against the capitalist imperialists, and he believed, in principle at least, to protecting his North Korean Marxist brothers against the imperialist behavior of the United States and the West. And as for Maoist thought today, it's funny, when Deng Xiaoping took over for Mao in the 70s, he was considered a revisionist, so kind of in the same camp as Khrushchev. So China became more of a market-based economy, which unfortunately, the people in North Korea, the leadership in North Korea, really found to be a traitorous move against Mao and his legacy. I would have to say that North Korea is probably more Maoist today than China is, because they still embrace that non-Khrushchev, more Stalinist viewpoint, of total totalitarian control. But for them, it's not the peasants who are running things, it's the military. But they do believe very much in a self-sufficient society, isolated, and that's where true socialism will come into play.
Stephanie,
So,
we only have a couple
and it,
minutes left in the show,
sure.
but I want to ask you, because it seems like there are so many high school age kids today and even college level kids who haven't studied history. They're confused into thinking that communism is a good thing or an all right thing, or hey, what's the problem with communism? Can communism ever work anywhere, even on a small scale?
Well, let's take a look at the evidence. Russia fell for the same reasons that, Maoist China fell. You know, you can't force industrialization on a people. You can't, communes in general don't work. The kibbutz didn't work in Israel. We even had a commune here in rural Tennessee back in the 70s. It was very successful at first, until they started to allow people who were sick and unable to participate in the overall production of the commune. Once they started letting those folks in, it went bankrupt. And unless if everyone is truly equal and able to contribute equally, which is impossible, there's no way for communism to ever be successful. So I would have to say, just based on the evidence, that no, communism doesn't work even at a macro level or a micro level.
And that's very important information for people to know. The constitutional republic that the United States was founded upon is the best system to be founded upon, and the best system, as you can tell, when you look at freedom in America versus other countries, third world countries, and just when you leave America in general. Many times people go to other countries for vacation to check them out, thinking, hey, is there like a better place out there? Many times they come back thinking, and agreeing with Ronald Reagan when he said, hey, if we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. That's what people need to be aware of when they study these dictators and genocides. Stephanie, it's been such a blessing to have you here with us to educate our viewers on Mao and the problems with Maoist thoughts and communism and all of that. So thank you so much for being here today and encouraging our audience to study history and find the problems in these different worldviews.
Thanks, Tony.
Friends, when we look at the available evidence, we find that the Christian worldview aligns with reality. And we need to think about our need for a Savior, and salvation's found only in the Lord Jesus Christ. Please check out our website, ratiochristi.org, to find out more about where we currently have chapters and where we still need chapters. Where we still need chapters is real easy. If we don't have one near you, we want to get one set up as soon as possible. So just go to ratiochristi.org, over to the top, click on chapters. You'll see a world map of where we currently have chapters. Little geopins you'll see throughout the world, and you can just click on it. It'll take you to the chapter page of that chapter, and you can find out where they're meeting, what day, what time, if you want to go to a current club that is meeting. But if you want to set up a club in your area, contact us, and we can help you do that as well. Please continue to pray for us and support this ministry financially, which will allow this vital work to continue. And remember, when it comes to what we believe and why we believe it, truth matters.